just in case anyone's in any doubt, I'm Sue, this is Dawn, and what we're doing is we're positioning a new project, the Network Plus, within the UK funding landscape. And so we did have a conversation, Dawn and I, about why we're in the digital stream. And I thought, well, I'll put that diagram up. But I'm going to go back a little bit in time and sort of maybe explain why we've got digital origins. Because you see in the middle, we refer to something called the fashion demonstrator. And what seems like such a long time ago now, but in 2017, 2018, the first time that the UK government had really seriously invested in major industries, we had something called the Creative Industry Cluster Programme. And we were very fortunate, we got 2 fashion and textile clusters out of that, one of which was Future Fashion Factory, the other one was the Business of Fashion Textile Technology. And out of that, and the close work that we did with the sector bodies in the UK, and the sort of the lobbying activity that went on behind that, we persuaded 3 of the UK Research and Innovation Research Councils that sustainable fashion and textiles was important. Not only should they have invested in the CICPs, which were amazing success, but they should also carry on investing in sustainable fashion and textiles. And if you look down here at the bottom, we've got Innovate UK, HMRC, which is Arts and Humanities Research Council, and NERC, which is the Natural Environment Research Council. And those 3 research councils came together and invested in this thing called the UKRI Circular Fashion and Textile Programme. And this is really important for us because it was interdisciplinary recognition of the sector and how important we are for all sorts of reasons, which I think we've spent the whole day talking about, so I'll not go over that. What happened is they put aside this £15 million and it broke down into the Network Plus, which is the bit that we're speaking about now, a recycling and sorting demonstrator. I'll put that in the ocean box. That one there, I'm sorry. Recycling and sorting demonstrator called Act UK, which has a lot of synergies with some of the earlier presentations this morning. The SIPIN, which is the Circular Innovation Fashion Network, and then the skills. And since this slide, things have moved on, which I was saying this is an old version. I'm sorry, if we want to circulate, I will update that diagram. In the meantime, we've got some fashion demonstrator reporting that's just completing, so there'll be some more reports coming out from that element of the delivery programme towards the end of this calendar year. And what's coming right at the end is this roadmap to transition for the circular economy. So what does UK need to invest in for our sector? But I know I've been saying UK a lot, but obviously we're a global sector, global supply chains. It's not just you fix it for that small part of the world. So it's really important that this is a journey that we're aligned strategically and we go on with obviously the rest of Europe, but the rest of the world. And I think that thinking is inherent in this. So one of those strands of investment, the Network Plus, it's broken down into 3 sub-networks, which are listed here. Impact Plus, Back to Baselines, and Future Fibres. And there's £2 million each within those networks. And we're each addressing a particular part of the jigsaw. So very, very simplistically, because this is not how it's written in our case for supports and not what it says, but very simplistically, Impact Plus is looking at the types of mechanisms that already exist to enable people to benchmark whether or not they're sustainable. Back to Baselines is looking at what exists and thinking about what data gaps, so what's been scientifically validated, what hasn't. One of the other thematic area leaders has a thing about, everyone says that, you know, pick a percentage of the world's waste is generated by fashion textiles, but where's the evidence for that? So that's the evidence base. And then the Future Fibres Network, as the name suggests, is all about fibres and looking at the environmental impact and the sort of a case study of what would happen if we adopted some very scientifically based, rigorous metrics and started to make the change. So This is the network plus. These are the 3 sub-networks. Sitting across the whole of it, we've got the programme coordination team, which I'll mention after Dawn's given us a little bit more information about one of the sub-networks. And the other thing to say, we've got a 3rd member of the Network Plus team in the room today. Sorry, Abby. This is Abby, who's our early career researcher lead for the programme coordination team. So just moving on very generically to introduce Dawn's next slides. Back to baselines, which is this middle bit. It's all about metrics, it's all about data, which brings us from the CICPs and their digital transition, digital tooling, how can we make a difference focus, into now we know we can collect the data, what do we do with it, why does it matter? And we, because we were part of the original CICP programme, we had a wealth of industry contacts, data from those programmes. We'd already gone out and done the industry research and the societal impact type of thinking. So we have thematic areas that we went into back to baselines with. These are the thematic areas. I know we're short on time, so I'm not going to read them to you. We read the 3. Very importantly, not only do we have academic partners within the consortium, you can see that the list of university partners for back to baselines is there. We also have UK Fashion and Textiles Association, which are the lead sector body for fashion and textiles in the UK, and RAP, which is the Waste Resource Action Partnership. So this is our Textiles 2030 programme, which I think most people have heard about. And these are the 2 organisations that really anchor the industry interest, make sure that everything we do is fit for purpose, it's going to have an impact in the real world. The other thing to say about this is very consciously we're multidisciplinary. So within the thematic areas, we've got supply chain, data modelling, circular systems. Dawn will introduce herself, but she's designing circular systems type of a person. Economics of innovation, eco-credentials, CSR. We've got the business school involved with that. Digital economy. You did an excellent introduction to parts of this, so I'm not going to labour that. Skills is always a big thing for us. It was one of the cross-cutting themes in the Future Fashion Factory, which was one of our original CICPs. And then we've got the consumer piece, we've got so why does it matter for society at large, and how can we not influence consumer behaviour, although that's part of it, but it's part of this eco-modulation thinking. How do we make it impossible for people to buy, high impact clothing and really the obvious choice of something that's low on it. And now I'll pass on to Sean.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about thematic area 1, and that's part of the back to baselines sub-network. So within thematic area 1, we're creating evidence-based and determining target areas. And there's 3 of us. It's a systematic perspective, interdisciplinary, and that's really important. So we bring quite a unique skill set. I work with the system and circular design. Herrick has quite a lot of technical fashion and textiles and industry knowledge. And then Phil is our kind of numbers man. And he's great because what we're able to do between 3 of us is model scenarios and in a way kind of make little tweaks, and Phil can change the data. So a lot of it is speculative, but it's quite exciting. It's really nice for our thematic area. So we are, I'm just going to get this in a couple of different things, sorry. So the purpose of thematic area 1 is actually quite a mouthful. When we wrote this, we set out to achieve an awful lot, but that's because we knew how complex data is in terms of proving environmental impacts. Fashion and textiles are complex, and they're far more complex, I think, than the consumer can acknowledge, the designer acknowledges. Circular systems don't exist within one sector, they can cross sectors. So really, if we're moving to a circular fashion and textiles system, we're going to have to think about how can we filter into other loops, other cycles. And one of the key things for us as well was that circularity isn't actually always sustainable. So getting the metrics right, understanding the data is really key to us. So that's why we were quite ambitious with these. And also the purpose of the network, which Sue did touch on, is that we're not actually solving this. we're exploring the problem, we're putting together collaborators, we're highlighting the challenges, so that at the end, we can put together future research that will solve the problem. So these ambitions are quite good. So we were really aiming to kind of critically review what is out there. And this is really important from a life cycle assessment, but also life cycle thinking. So there's a lot of qualitative and quantitative data. I mean, the review, there's like 180 life cycle thinking tools. Industry are completely buried with certifications and standards, you know, and they're different data sets and different extremes of the matrix. So being able to map them and think about where do these fit in a system, the value chain, is really interesting. And again, that observation, not necessarily saying this is our conclusion, this is what we can fix. And for doing that, we want to determine what are our target areas. Let's be really ambitious. What should we be measuring? We know what we're told to measure. We know what is kind of being pushed on us by quite, you know, expensive certifications. You know, it's a whole industry now. And actually, what should we be looking at? How do we make that accessible? How do we make that inclusive? The UK industry is driven by SMEs and micros, so they're costed out of all of that. And what happens is the greenwashing. You know, it's on the label. It's kind of eco-sustainable because it's got this, but it's actually probably not from a sustainable fashion brand. It's probably from a big industry leader. Okay, so then creating these evidence bases, these interdisciplinary evidence bases, and that's really collecting on our way these matrices, these system maps and case studies, and being able to say, look, this is what we've discovered, this is really interesting, and it not necessarily existing in just fashion textiles. It might go into a different sector if we find something that's working. It might not be qualitative or quantitative. It could be like a mixture of the two data sets. And exploring these baselines that we need to establish new certifications, new ways of measuring things. And ultimately, what we should do within our work package is make suggestions that link across our other thematic areas. What we really wanted to achieve, put very simply, is to question what data at the moment is being captured, what is the motivation for that data, who holds the data, who can access the data, and how is this data being used? So these are all really data-driven questions that when we sat down at the beginning, after we've been awarded the funding, we were like, let's simplify this. What are the really kind of key questions? And it's complex, it's corporate data. And that was one of the things that I think everybody who interacts with our network, whether you're from industry, academia, and consumer, you actually want this to be accessible and meaningful. At the minute, it's becoming meaningless, and we're beginning to not believe data. And so that's not helpful if you're trying to create a design tool, if you're trying to create a metric, if you're trying to create a policy document. So our thematic area is all about data. We've got a huge industry network, we got the funding. So we've got data, give us the data. There was a massive presumption everyone had data and that our industry partners would open that up, we'd get micro funding to work with that data. What's been really interesting for me as a systems researcher, as a design researcher, is that there is a really nice business model for companies to work with startups, to work with industry, to look at their data, to understand where they could go better in their supply chain, make changes. They've had interesting partners, really big industry partners, and they can't do the work because they can't get hold of the data. So this is a multi-perspective problem, and that actually the data is not available. So it could be there, but it's not useful. It's not usable. Sometimes you can't access it. So we've come up with some really interesting studies. They're not ethical. You can't do them, you might get arrested. We're absolutely not getting funding for that, which is really frustrating. And then if you do get an industry partner, they're not quite sure because the supply chain is so complex, actually, are we collecting it? And then if they start to think, why are we not collecting it? Because to be honest, you might not want to collect it. You know, if somebody asks you for it and you need to give it them. So, you know, this is a really interesting issue in itself that we won't go into, but an observation is we can't get to the data. So we've had to, and we're at the very early stages, we've designed this study and we've kind of got our ducks in order. We don't have our results yet, but what we have done is create a very interdisciplinary, systematic approach to this research that will engage our industry as participants along the way. It will use very desk-based research, very academic research, but it would also use kind of co-design and systems approach. So stage one has been this literature review, really mapping LCA, LCT, and understanding what's already out there. But actually, when you take that right down into an industry workshop and you ask them for narratives about their experience, and you have qualitative data, how can we then translate that into quantitative? And we're getting really lovely examples from this, which has led to further interviews, hopefully might go into some observations of practices, and in itself it's kind of becoming an extra little output. Then we're moving into stage two, which is developing case studies, so looking across sector, what works really well, what doesn't work, what should we be measuring, again informed by our industry who've said, you know, should we be looking at water, should we not? One of the narrative examples was about transportation and this real bias to use sea over air. And we went back to Phil and did some fancy figures, and it's really great. So we can go back and say, okay, look, and that's the whole point of our team. And we are doing the work ourselves, so that's quite nice as well. And we don't have a budget for fancy researchers, we've got very small time. So again, this study design includes that. And then finally moving on with our case studies, analysing them and understanding, like, okay, what is realistic? What do industry want? What are their needs? So using a very user perspective to make some recommendations, to come up with some scenarios. And then we're going to take those scenarios into our final stage where we're developing solutions. And with this, will be around our kind of practices in industry, which will feed into the other work, thematic area 5 around behaviours and what they can do to change. So we're not just keeping everything to ourselves. And then we're looking at very now, near and far. So we're doing some futures thinking. It's really great when the scientists hear these things and they're like, don't get the post-its out. Post-its will be out. So we're really thinking about what do these scenarios mean in terms of futures thinking? How do we bring them to life? How do we do some data science and looking at some mathematics to quantify those at the moment? And then taking that back to our industry network in the final workshop to start to really roadmap our recommendations on what we mean. The idea is we'll have these meaningful metrics. Back to Sue.
2 observations there. One, I would pay good money to watch you in a room with post-its and Phil and Parrot.
You've had to pay money for that workshop.
And secondly, I was just thinking about some of the early conversations we've been having about the balancing act, because someone was saying that it was a no-brainer to do everything, produce everything overseas because they could get it a lot cheaper and then transport it in. And if you did it by sea, it was going to be low impact. And then Phil looked at his calculator and went, right, okay, let's have a look at the energy usage in a UK-based factory versus a factory in, you know, wherever in the developing world. And actually the emissions that come from manufacturing with coal-fired carbon power stations as opposed to wind power far outweigh the savings that you make in the transport costs and the labour. So it's this systems and everything depends on everything else thing. Sorry. So just to bring everything back together again, the Network Plus I introduced to start with 3 sub-networks working collectively to tackle a very big challenge. And across the top of the 3 sub-networks, we have this programme coordination team. Basically, the funding bodies said, okay, guys, you've got these 3 sub-networks. They put us in a room, they shook us up, and they said, elect a convener and tell us how you're going to make sure you don't duplicate, you don't double fund some of your plus-bot projects. And actually, at the end of it, you come out with a coherent story. So we're actually 1 network plus 3 sub-networks, but we're speaking with 1 voice. Do you see what I mean? So, I mean, I know you can't read that, but that basically says that we have an industry advisory board, we have our funding body, we have the convener, who happens to be Professor Stephen Russell from University of Leeds. And then this is the PCT structure across the top. So Abby, as I've already said, is a career researcher. We have a communications and events person, we have an evaluation person, we have a network research manager, which is temporarily me. And then these are the sub-networks just down there with very abbreviated organograms for each of the sub-networks, so you can sort of see how everything fits together. If that makes sense. Good. And then the last thing, which is something that our communications and events leads actually is because obviously we're doing all this great work and we're interacting internally with our network, and we're coming out to international conferences like this and saying this is what we're doing. But there's no point collecting all this data and having all these thoughts if we don't tell everybody about them. So one of the things that we're doing is putting together a knowledge and information portal. And everything that we produce is going to be open access, everything that we can, because Dawn's just touched on some of the confidentiality issue with the data. Everything that we can, we're going to put on this portal. So as Kat has said, it will be the place to access all this top quality research. We did look at some of the existing similar platforms that are out there. So if anyone wants to have a look and see approximately what we're going to be coming up with, that's a nice look. But that's in a nutshell our positioning of where the Network Plus came from, why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing, a deep dive into thematic area 1 on one of the sub-networks on what Back to Baselines TA1 is doing, and then what we think we're going to get out of it. And what's else?